booties for black girl nerds. All right, so this is going to be a long video because I am behind and everybody else is caught up, which is great. But I do want to play catch up on the Paradise recaps, which, by the way, thanks for those of you that have been tuning in. I see that some of you guys are looking at the videos. I appreciate the comments. Please, if you have not already, like the video. If you are enjoying these recaps, be sure to subscribe to the channel, by the way, because we do more than recaps. We do lots of interviews here on Black Girl Nerds. And yeah, I would love to get your feedback on what you think of these episodes of Paradise, but I just appreciate you engaging and watching the content, because regardless of who watches it, again, like I said in the very first recap, even if it's one person, that's fine. I love this show so much. I'm so invested in Paradise that I'm willing to take up the bandwidth of my already busy schedule to carve out and create and curate this content, because it's fun. You know, I am geeking out over this show. The video is going to be very long because I am recapping episodes 3 and 4 respectively. Remember, episodes 1 through 3 dumped on the premiere day, which I was not privy to. Otherwise, I probably would have already had that set up, but that's totally fine. So I'm behind. And episode 4 just came out this week. So I'm going to do both 3 and 4 so that way I can play catch up. So when episode 5 comes out, I'll have a recap ready and timely for you guys to watch soon after you've seen the episode. So episode 3, Another Day in Paradise. We get to listen to that iconic Phil Collins song, which I believe is just pretty much the theme of Paradise at this point. It was played very prominently throughout season 1, and we get to hear that play pretty much at the end, and we'll talk about more of that later in this episode. But Another Day in Paradise is the name of the episode. We open with Sinatra, who is still in the hospital. She's recovering after that gunshot wound from Jane Driscoll, who shot her. If you guys remember back in season 1, that whole situation. So she is in the hospital, still recovering from that. She was actually in a coma. And she's having these memories, these visions, very similar to the memories / visions that Xavier, I was about to call him Sterling. I caught myself, but I told you I caught myself, but I really was about to call him Sterling. The same visions that Xavier had in episode 2. So Sinatra meets with this scientist and she asks to pick his brain. He's very well known about metaphysics and quantum physics and anything with the word physics. And Sinatra wants to find out about how she can stop this catastrophe that's bound to happen. And the scientist kind of scoffs at her. You know, he's an intelligent guy. He knows a lot more about the environment, about the way the earth works, and really just about how history works compared to Sinatra's way of thinking on this crisis. And he tells her that this is not something that can be stopped. And Sinatra, who has a wealth of resources, who is a billionaire, thinks that money is going to be able to buy her way out of this problem. And the scientist says exactly that you can't buy your way out of this. And the only thing that you have is one valuable asset that you cannot buy. And Sinatra asks, well, what is that? And he says it's time. We then flash back to 9 years earlier. Cal Bradford, he just won the presidential election. Everybody's in high spirits. And so we flash back 9 years earlier. Cal Bradford just won the presidential election. Everybody's in high spirits. And in the room is Cal Bradford and Sinatra, and they have a brief exchange, and then Cal leaves the room. And then in walks Kane Bradford, Cal's father. So Kane and Sinatra begin to have a dialogue. Kane is privy to Sinatra's interest with this project that she's been working on. And we find out a little bit more information here that she's trying to purchase tech that's going to help the sustainability of the bunker. But unfortunately, the seller or the developer of that tech that she wants to buy it from isn't interested in selling. So Kane is like, well, maybe I can help you find someone that's going to help do a little bit more convincing. So just put a pin in that for a little bit, because Kane telling Sinatra that I have, something that's going to help do a little bit more convincing of this seller to give you this tech that's going to help the bunker. Keep in mind the kind of person that Kane Bradford is, all right, as well as Sinatra. But we're going to find out a little bit later what that kind of convincing it is that he's talking about. So we're now back in the hospital, and we see Sinatra there. She's still recovering from her injury that happened back in season 1. So now we're alternating back in the hospital. Remember, we're alternating different flashbacks throughout this episode. That is Fogelman style. So that is just the way the structure of Paradise is done on this series. Fogelman meaning Dan Fogelman, the creator and showrunner of Paradise. And if you haven't seen This Is Us, he does the same thing on This Is Us. So anyway, so we're going back and forth with these different flashbacks. So in this flashback, we're at the point where we're back at the hospital, Sinatra has woken up from her coma, but we also learned that Henry Baines is now president of the United States. If you remember back in season 1, Cal Bradford, he was assassinated, and then Vice President Baines ended up succeeding him as president after the death of Cal Bradford. So now he's president of the United States. His face is plastered everywhere, which is very annoying, but he's very proud to be president of the United States, clearly. But not everybody is so happy about this, because we see a kid that's running around and he takes a spray can and graffitis an X on some property. Then there's a cop with a quickness that grabs him and hauls him into a car and drags him off to jail. We then cut to Presley. Presley is Xavier's daughter. She is still communicating with Jeremy through mail. If you remember back in season 1, Presley and Jeremy, they have a relationship. So right now they're communicating with each other and sending each other notes. In the note from Jeremy to Presley, he explains that his friends has been in prison for graffitiing X over property, which X stood for Xavier, and they did that in support of her father. Then we see Agent Nicole Robinson. If you remember from season 1, Agent Nicole Robinson had a relationship with Cal. She's very entangled in all of this, and she's worked closely with Jane Driscoll. She's just kind of, those little antennas are going up, and, her sixth sense is sort of going off about, who this woman is, what happened that day that Sinatra was shot. And she's kind of piecing together the events of that day to really understand what happened, because something just doesn't quite feel right in her spirit about things. And in this scene where we see Nicole, Jane, and Xavier decides that he's going to take the fall for what happened to Sinatra, which I thought was a really interesting choice. And Nicole was not happy with that, but he insisted he is going to take the fall for what happened, and that's going to be the narrative that they go with. The following scene, we see Agent Nicole Robinson with Xavier's kids, James and Presley, and she's making some coffee, and I can't remember if it's either James or Presley, but they make it very clear that you don't like coffee. And she's like, oh, I'm not really making it for myself. I'm just making some. I don't even quite remember exactly what she says, but she's making coffee, and clearly she does not like coffee, so that coffee is being made for someone else. That's a very important thing to remember. So then Agent Nicole Robinson leaves the house. She sees Jane. Jane and her have a little bit of a different dynamic now because Nicole has actually been demoted. She's now essentially a driver for Jane, which is probably really insulting for her right now. And, she doesn't really like Jane at all, so it's even worse. But she takes that coffee that she made earlier in the kitchen and she hands it over to Jane. Jane takes a quick sip. She doesn't like the way it tastes and gives it back to Agent Nicole Robinson. I'll just call her Nicole. I don't know why I keep calling her Agent Nicole Robinson, but she gives it back to Nicole. So there's a method to the reason why she wanted that information, because she's slowly collecting details and clues about Jane. And of course, Jane is completely unaware of this. So there's a meeting with the president and his administration, and we learned that the power that's being used to help fuel the community, a significant portion of that power is being siphoned off by Sinatra for her own personal use. And the president wasn't even aware of this, which is boggles my mind. This is one of the most clueless presidents ever, but it probably says a lot about, I guess, that role of presidents, that there's not a lot of information that's disclosed to them at that level. But still, he has no idea about this until one of the members of the cabinet says, yeah, by the way, Sinatra's been siphoning off power. Okay. Would have been good to get that information a while ago. But yeah, the president finds out and he is not happy and he wants to figure out why and how she's doing this. So that is something that becomes a key part of this story. So then the president proposes that they raise the temperature of the bunker in lieu of having less power. Anders, who is the guy that actually is the creator of the bunker, he's there in the cabinet meeting. I don't know if he's a member of the cabinet or not. Feel free to leave in the comments what his role is in relation to the administration, but we know he's the guy that helped create, or essentially did create the bunker. He's like, dude, if you raise the temperature, it's just gonna make things worse and it's gonna cause a meltdown. So are you stupid? And that's exactly what he tells the president. Like, are you stupid? And right on for that, by the way. I love that. Anders is my guy for saying that. And he's like, I guess you're going to arrest me now. And he's quickly escorted out of the room immediately after insulting the president. So then we get this really intense scene between Jane and Sinatra. Jane meets with Sinatra in the hospital. Remember, Sinatra is still recovering from her injury, which was caused by Jane. And Jane asks, do you remember what happened that day? And Sinatra, we can't really tell if she's being truthful or honest in this moment, but she's like, my brain right now is kind of foggy and crazy, so I really don't remember the events of that day. And Jane is just like, well, if you do remember, just remember that I did what I did to help keep you clean. So very interesting exchange. You don't know who's telling the truth. You don't know who's lying. You don't know where people's loyalties lie. And I want you to pay attention to what happened in that moment, because that is going to tie in later to a scene that happens towards the tail end, probably more of the third act of the episode. And I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments about it. But this exchange between Sinatra and Jane is kind of crucial. And I also feel like there's probably information that we didn't get in totality in this scene that we'll probably get in later episodes. that's going to fill in the gaps, that's going to answer the whys to some of the questions that we have by the end of this episode. And I'm going to address that later on in this recap. So then Jane tells Sinatra that Baines wants to bring her in for questioning. So Sinatra meets with Dr. Tarabi. I'm going to call her Gabby. And also Sinatra calls her Gabby. So Sinatra meets with Dr. Gabby. And Dr. Gabby isn't too thrilled to see Sinatra because she's been keeping secrets. She's been, keeping her out of the loop on a lot of things. And she's very suspicious of her at this point. So this little reunion is kind of bittersweet, so to speak. And Gabby leads Sinatra into this interrogation room. So then we see James, and James goes to the mailbox and he comes across a letter. It's one of the letters that Jeremy has written to Presley because that's how they've been communicating. And in the letter, Jeremy asks Presley to meet him at the edge of the world by 6 p.m. that night. Well, James is kind of tired about all of this drama that's been going on with them and his family, and he just wants things to be normal. So he takes the letter and he just throws it away. In the following scene, we see Sinatra. She is strapped to a chair and she's going to be submitted to do a lie detector test. Gabby is, again, not very happy with Sinatra in this moment. She's been kept out of the loop. She's been lied to. So she wants answers, as does Baines. Baines is behind a hidden glass wall where he cannot be seen, even though Sinatra knows that he's in the room because she's been in these interrogation rooms before. She's done the interrogations, so she knows who's behind those walls. And she even makes it clear that she knows that Baines is behind there. And then Gabby asks the question, have you been siphoning power for the bunker? There's a dramatic pause, and then we cut to a different scene. This scene is now with Sinatra and Billy Pace. We remember Billy Pace. He had a whole entire episode named after him in season 1. So Billy Pace, this is actually the first meeting of Billy and Sinatra. And Billy at this point is being contracted to do a hit for Sinatra. We don't know who the hit is on just yet. They have these exchanges. Billy is kind of a jackass, to be honest with you. He's a little bit, rough around the edges when it comes to how he runs things. But also, Sinatra is really obvious with just blurting out things in the open. And he's like, bruh, if you say anything else that's obvious, I'm going to get up and leave. So clearly this is her first time. She doesn't know how these things go. And she hands him a manila envelope. He opens up the envelope and the photo is a man named Henry Miller. I will share more about who he is later on in this recap. So now we go back to the interrogation scene and Baines is insistent on. So we're back at the interrogation scene. Baines insists that, Dr. Gabby, you got to ask that question again. The question is, are you siphoning power for the bunker? So Dr. Gabby asks Sinatra the question once again. And Sinatra, she's dancing around it, but she says no. And Dr. Gabby looks over at the, administrator of the lie detector. And he nods saying, that she's telling the truth. So we find out she's actually telling the truth. Or she's just a really good liar. We don't know. She's literally a human lie detector. So she's probably able to beat that thing. But nonetheless, this infuriates Baines. He bursts in there and he's like, you're going to give me answers. I don't even care. He's president now. This guy is so ego driven. It's absolutely awful and insufferable. He reminds me of Donald Trump. He's very Trump coded, Henry Baines. But he's just like, I'm the president now. You're going to give me the information that I want, blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the exchange, Sinatra says this very funny comment saying, whew, that guy needs a breath mint. And at one point you think, oh, that's a funny line. But that line actually has some significance and meaning, which we will talk about later in the recap. So the next scene, Billy Pace sees his mark at the bar, the mark being Henry Miller, the guy that was in the photograph, that was in the manila envelope that Sinatra handed over to him for the hit. They're at a bar, he's kind of talking with them, exchanging niceties and talking about quantum physics and, how, wow, that's just way over my head. This is Billy talking. That's just way over my head. And after they've had a few drinks, Billy just gets right down to business. He's like, look, I got this contract here and you're going to sign it. And that's just the way things are going to go. And I got a gun on my side. And if you don't sign it, things can be the hard way. So we could either go the easy way and you sign it, in which case you'll end up being a very rich man, or you can go the hard way. Now, Henry is looking at the piece of paper. He's very reluctant. And he's, saying all of this stuff like this existential kind of conversation around, wow, you must be here for a reason, we're all here for a reason, something to that extent. And Billy pushes the contract over to him, and Henry starts to sign it. Now, while this is happening, Billy's just kind of like, taking a swig of his drink and kind of looking over, sort of keeping an eye out on the place, I guess trying to make sure that nobody's like keeping an eye on him, but he's never paying attention to Henry signing the document. Henry leaves out of the bar. Billy picks up the piece of paper, looks down at the piece of paper, and sees that an address was written. So Henry never signed the document. So now Billy's got a problem on his hands. Meanwhile, Baines is still in his feelings, like this Trump-esque president is just really upset and being a big baby about what is happening right now. And Gabby's like, you should let me put the pressure on Sinatra. It's way more effective that way. Then we cut to another scene with Jane. So in this scene, it's the members of the administration, cabinet, what have you. Also, there's Dr. Tarabi, aka Gabby, President Baines, also Agent Nicole Robinson, and then Agent Jane Driscoll. So in this scene, which I gotta say, Jane is slick, she's opportunistic, she is a snake, she's clever. But she plays reverse psychology on President Baines by giving him a compliment. And that is sort of like, what's the word that I'm looking for? Or what's the analogy I'm looking for? It's like kryptonite to a narcissist. And I don't even know if that's the right like metaphor to use, but like if you want to get into the psyche and play like reverse psychology on a narcissist and an egotistical maniac, give them a compliment, stroke their ego. And that's exactly what she did with President Baines to get her on his good side. Meanwhile, Nicole is witnessing all of this and sees that this is a bunch of BS and witnesses this power play by Jane. And, she knows that this girl, she's slick. And this further confirms her suspicions about Agent Driscoll. So I'm going to push ahead to the scene with Presley and James. James mentions that he discarded the note that he had found of Jeremy to Presley. This upsets Presley. And James tells her the contents of the letter and that Jeremy said to meet him at the end of the world at 6 p.m. And Presley's like, bruh, that was an hour ago. So she immediately leaves the house and starts to search for Jeremy. Unfortunately, Presley is too late as she sees in that scene that Jeremy has been arrested by the cops. Meanwhile, Nicole starts fishing around in Billy Pace's old place and starts looking for clues and hints that can help confirm her suspicions about Jane. Now, in this next scene, which is a pretty pivotal scene in this episode, we see Billy parked outside of Henry Miller's home. One thing that was very interesting that struck me about this scene was Henry is standing on the porch of his home, and he actually spots Billy sitting in his car that's parked adjacent, like across the street, essentially, from his house. So at any time, Henry could have ran away or locked the door or called the cops or something. Like, he knows that this man is out to do harm to him if he doesn't sign this contract. But instead, he just looks at him and then he just walks into the house. So we see Billy in the car. He takes out his gun. He puts the silencer on the gun, which is some serious business. And he walks into Henry's home. As he walks into Henry's home, he goes into the back room and we see Henry with a woman who is very sickly looking, looks like she's ill. She looks like she's pretty much like on her deathbed. And Henry reveals to us that this is his wife. So I just want to pause really quick just to explain to you who Henry Miller is. He's a quantum physicist, scientist, and professor, and he owns Vestige Quantum, which is the tech that Sinatra wants to help sustain the bunker. So that's just some background on who he is. And also, I think I skipped out on this information, so I want to also insert this here. So there's a young boy that Henry Miller had been a mentor to, who is fostered and also has brought in as a business partner for him. And this is something that he mentioned while he was having drinks with Billy, you know, unknowingly, not knowing who this man was, but he was disclosing that, you know, this young boy that he's come to know, that's very smart, one of the smartest people in his class, is now his business partner. And he's grown very close to him to the point where he's become like a son to him. So that boy is a very important part of this story, because one of the things that happens in this moment while we see Billy in the room with Henry and his dying wife, Henry starts talking about his wife and her condition and how they weren't able to have kids because of it. And then that connects us with the story earlier about him having a son-like figure in this young prodigy, so to speak, that he had in his class that is now his business partner. So he's grown very close to this young boy. So while he's explaining all of this to Billy, Billy has this really confused look. It's kind of funny, but he has this really confused look on his face during the whole time that Henry is giving this monologue of information about his wife, about his family history, about how they couldn't really travel anywhere. And then again, he's having this conversation about, you know, everything happens for a reason, and, you know, you're brought here for a purpose. And one of the things that Henry tells Billy is that, you know, I know you got to do what you got to do, but please don't harm the boy. Don't harm the boy. And then Henry starts talking more. He's very verbose in this moment, but he starts saying some more stuff, and then Billy points the gun at him and shoots him in the head, kills him instantly. Then at that point, Billy walks out of the room and we see that boy walk in the room. Well, that boy turns out to be Link. The link to the link. So we all remember who Link is. We've been seeing him since episode 1 of this series, and now we know that Link is very much connected to the tech that is involved with this bunker. He's obviously going to be connected to Sinatra in some way. He's now connected to Billy Pace in some way, but I don't think that that's going to be relevant because we all know about Billy Pace's demise. But Billy says something that's very poignant, and he tells this boy, who we now know as Link, that, this was the luckiest effing day of your life. And he walks off and lets him go free, unharmed. And essentially, it is the luckiest day of his life. I should also add that Henry Miller, I think, already knew going in that he was ready to die, because he tells his wife, "I'll see you soon," and then kisses her on the forehead. So already he knew what his fate was the moment that he even saw Billy had his car parked across the street. And he was ready to just end this whole thing. The next scene is Billy and Sinatra. Billy tells her that it's done. And Billy starts to joke with her because Sinatra then asks about possibly doing more and additional services in the future. And he's like, "What do you want, a punch card or something? You want a frequent flyer card?" I don't know exactly the line, but he jokes around about it. It's pretty clear that Sinatra is very determined to get what she wants. And now she's got an asset, a tool, and that is Billy Pace. So Billy says, "Look, if you need me again, all I need is a name and a photograph." And he tells her a code phrase to use. So it's sort of like a code phrase to use in order to show your mark. So he says, "And tell them they could use a breath mint." Sound familiar? Didn't Sinatra say that somebody else needed a breath mint earlier in a scene in the interrogation room? A certain person that's president? Okay. All right. So we see where this is going. Let's continue. So Jane is on security duty with Baines. And I'm sure her little compliment that stroked his ego was enough to get her close to the president as possible. So he's jogging in the middle of the night. She's on solo security duty. So it's just her and President Baines in the middle of the night jogging. And this is her opportunity. And what does she do? She gets behind Baines, takes a knife, and slits his throat wide open, and he is dead. Now, I'm going to stop here because now he's gone. And there was a code phrase that is a mark used by a hitman, specifically said to Billy Pace, or said by Billy Pace to Sinatra. So the only thing I can surmise from this is that Sinatra did a hit on Baines. But my question is, why would she have Jane do it? And that goes back to that scene earlier between Jane and Sinatra when Jane confronted her about, "Did you remember anything from that night?" And that there's probably more information in that scene that we have not yet got that informs why Jane killed Baines. And that hit was constructed by Sinatra. And that the two of them are working together, even though it seems like, well, why would they be working together? Because Sinatra was nearly killed by Jane, and Jane tried to kill Sinatra. But I think that, in my opinion, I don't have access to the scripts or anything, but in my opinion, I think that there's more information in that episode that's being left out that Mr. Dan Fogelman and his writing team will show us in future episodes to come, that exchange between Sinatra and Jane. But trust me when I say Sinatra is the one that put that hit on Baines. And it's pretty evident that, she just needed to get him out of the way because he wanted information from her that she's not willing to give. And if he gets too close to ruining her plan, she can't have that. So, eliminate the threat. Baines was a threat, and that's exactly what she did. So after the murder, Jane picks up her phone and finds out that Nicole is actually looking for her. And this works out for Jane because she's kind of smiling because it's like, okay, this is going to be a nice finishing touch for what I have planned with this hit. Because what happens is once Nicole finds Jane's location, Jane attacks her. She puts her in like this sleeper hit mode to the point, when I say mode, I mean move, sleeper hit move, and to the point where Nicole is unconscious. And then Nicole falls to the ground. And then what Jane does is take the knife that she killed Baines with and plants it into Nicole's hand. Ugh. So now Nicole is being framed for Baines' murder. And then Jane calls security and says, oh my goodness, the president is down. And oh, look, Nicole is the one that did it. So I just cannot stand Jane. She just gets on my last nerve. She's manipulative. She's a snake. She is a witch. I can't wait until justice is served. Let's just say that. So the next scene, we see Jeremy taken into an imprisonment camp. And at that camp, we spot Anders. So Anders, I guess he got arrested and jailed for exactly what he thought he would get jailed for, calling the president stupid. And Jeremy sees him and Anders is like, oh, aren't you the president's son? And Jeremy's like, aren't you the guy that built the bunker? And he's like, I am the guy that built the bunker. And then Jeremy's like, well, you're going to help us blow the doors open. The final scene is Carmen. Carmen is the housekeeper and co-conspirator for Sinatra. So it's Carmen and Sinatra together, and they're having a conversation. There's a name that is dropped, and Sinatra asks, how is Alex? How is Alex? Okay, this is the same Alex. Yeah, that Alex. This is the same Alex where Link and Geiger are actually trying to find and kill him. This was in episode 1, remember? So that's the Alex we're talking about? I'm pretty sure that's the same Alex. So now we know that the Alex that Geiger and Link are looking for, that they're trying to kill, and his men that they're trying to kill, is the same Alex that is linked to Sinatra. So now all of these little threads are connecting to each other like a little, friendship bracelet. Not really. That's a terrible metaphor. But they're all, the dots are slowly connecting. And in the last scene, we see Dr. Gabby. She is listening in on Sinatra and Carmen's conversation. So her room has been tapped. Trust no one on this show. And that is the end of episode 3. All right, so we're going to go to episode 4, Holy Charge. Whew, this episode gutted me. And for those of you that have seen it already, you already know. You already know. So let's just dive right into it. We open with Link, who has memories, these visions, and they mirror the same exact visions in episode 2 that Xavier had of Link. But in this case, it's Link having visions of Xavier. So they're walking down that hallway and Link looks back and he sees Xavier in his memory, in his vision. So it's a nice mirror to what we saw in episode 2 to what now Link is experiencing in episode 4. So Xavier wakes up to a sofa chained and he sees Annie Annie unchains him as he wakes up and lets him get up and walk around the house. I guess she chained him because she didn't want him to run off, and I'm thinking she did that more for his safety and protection than anything else. And then Xavier notices that she's pregnant and then asks how far along is she. We then cut to a scene from a flashback in the past where we see Cal Bradford, and he is in a hospital, and there is a woman there that is also pregnant, and she is about to deliver a baby. Well, we find out that this is going to be the very first baby that is born inside a bunker. So it's a very historical moment. Cal wants to make this a big PR thing for the community, and that is why he's there in the hospital room. He wants to witness the birth. He wants to be present because it's essentially a big deal. The very first baby that has never had any exposure to the outside world. Going back to Annie, as she's stitching up Xavier, Xavier explains that he needs to go to Atlanta to find his wife, Terry. Meanwhile, Annie's like, no, you're going to Colorado. So there's this back and forth between the two of them, between going to Colorado or going to Atlanta. So then Annie and Xavier, they sit together on the porch, and Xavier sees the sun setting. And this is a real sunset. And he tells Annie he hasn't seen a real sunset in years. And then Annie shares with him why she wants to go to Colorado and that she has a baby daddy who's out there that she needs to see. This scene between Shailene Woodley and Sterling K. Brown is just so good. These actors are incredibly talented. I was so honored to be able to talk to both of them for the press junket for Black Girl Nerds.
I think the relationship that we created was really beautiful because it felt like a holy love.
Yeah.
You know, it felt like love that transcended. It wasn't
You don't get to see
romantic.
it that often. Yeah.
You don't get to
Very
see it,
cool.
especially between a man and a woman. You
Yeah.
just so rarely get to see love expressed with intimacy, but without sexuality
Yeah.
or without romance. Just like a, I got you and I see you and I will walk into the woods with you, even if I don't fully understand everything about you.
Yeah.
And I was so moved by that as a person, as Shailene, separate from the show, but
Yeah.
also as Annie, that, you know, forging a relationship despite a lack of trust, despite fear, despite the unknown,
Yeah.
was something that I just think is rare. You don't really get to explore it.
Wonderful lesson that you don't have to be 100% sure of something necessarily in order to take a step out,
Yeah.
to take a step forward. I think that's a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Because when are you 100% sure about anything?
Right.
And they have really incredible on-screen chemistry. And this is a moment where you really get to see how these two characters are able to work together in tandem in this situation. And then we find out that, you know, after they've had this great discussion on the porch, that Annie's sort of, her trust, her level of trust, it builds, right? And her walls break down a little bit. And then she's just like, all right, well, if I go with you to Atlanta, will you take me back to Colorado? And Xavier agrees. So then that's their agreement. Then we move back to Xavier and Annie, and Xavier finds an ID card. It's that same ID card that Link gave to her back in the very first episode. And he looks at the card, and those memories, those visions of Link walking down the hall comes back to him. And he's like, are you all right? Xavier does share with Annie that he's been having these memories of things that, and he can't quite articulate what that means or what it's all about. And then Annie just dismisses it, not in a rude way, but just is like, well, you know, you've had concussions, so that's probably what's bringing this on. So as Annie and Xavier are traversing and going on their path, they come across a group of people that are on a carriage. And Xavier, keep in mind, he doesn't really know the outsider life as much as Annie. So even though he sees these people, he isn't as hesitant to approach them. Meanwhile, Annie's like, we can go on another road if you want. Like, and he's like, no, we're gonna waste so much time if we do that. So she's just like, well, don't look at them, just keep on walking. And then, of course, Xavier looks over at them and says hi, completely ignoring Annie's instruction. But luckily for them, the group of people, which consisted of 2 men, a woman, and her child, they, continue on their journey. And the woman has a gun in her hand. So it just looks like it's a family that's just trying to protect themselves out there and go on their own journey as well. So back at the baby bunker flashback, we find out that the baby's heart rate has dropped. Things are getting a little bit scary right now. And Cal decides that he's going to jump into scrubs and go into the OR with the mother to hopefully see if everything is going to be okay. Xavier cautions him, you shouldn't go in there by yourself. And then Cal is like, well, scrub up. So back with Annie and Xavier, Xavier discovers that Annie's not too good at trusting people. And this is another just great moment of chemistry between Sterling K. Brown and Shailene Woodley, where Annie is taught by Xavier how to swaddle a baby, and he uses a bag of flour to do that. And it's so heart-wrenching knowing the future of what's going to happen, but he wraps up the bundle of flour and he says, you got to wrap it up like a burrito. And it's just a very tender moment between both Annie and Xavier here. And Annie begins to question, like, what kind of world is she bringing her baby to? So then Annie leaves the house. She then starts clenching over. We assume that she has labor pains, but then we find out that she has preeclampsia. I hope I'm saying that right. Preeclampsia. And this is a condition that pregnant women go through that causes high blood pressure and swelling. And Annie says that it can be harmful to both her and the baby. And she really didn't want to tell. She knew that she had this condition. She didn't want to tell Xavier about it because she was fearful that he wouldn't bring her along the journey to, whether it was Colorado or Atlanta, but specifically Atlanta in this case, that he wouldn't bring her with him. So we learned that, she's got a condition that is not really one that should require her to be on her feet. Things are getting really bad with Annie, and also things are getting bad with the baby that is in the bunker. And this is where Paradise is just like chef's finger kissed with his editing, where Dan Fogelman and the writing team and the editing team shine, because there's this intercutting between Annie, her baby, the distress that's happening between her as a mom delivering this baby, and then the distress of both the mother and the baby in the baby bunker flashback. So both moms are dealing with very difficult pregnancies. Both are under distress. Things are at a high level of anxiety for both of these characters. And we're cutting back and forth between these two moments in the timeline of this show, within the timeline of this story. Meanwhile, as Xavier sees that Annie is in a lot of pain, he insists he's got to leave. He's got to find help. He can't just stand there and watch her just hover over in pain. And Annie doesn't want him to leave. She doesn't want him to go anywhere. She doesn't want him to get help. She doesn't want him to find any strangers. She's like, we're fine. And he's like, no, I got to go out there. She's like, you don't know what's out there. And I think in this moment, if I can just pause here, this is just a testament to who, Annie is as a character. Annie is someone who doesn't trust people, doesn't trust outsiders, to the point where she's willing to live alone for years by herself, and she's comfortable with that. So she's willing to be involved in a very high risk pregnancy and do that on her own without asking for any foreign help, because that's just the way she's built. So I just wanted to acknowledge that in this situation as to why she didn't want Xavier to leave. That is literally just who she is, and she's just built that way. So Xavier sees a house. He starts asking for help. No one answers. So he actually goes inside the house. He sees that it's abandoned. So he just starts taking supplies from inside. And then a man approaches him with a gun. But Xavier goes into secret agent mode and knocks the gun out of his hand, wrestles him and takes him down and hovers over him. And he tells him, like, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just trying to get help. But there's another man with a gun that points at Xavier and says, get your hands off my son. So then we go back to Annie, and Annie is still in distress. She's still in pain. And then a man walks in, and it's the same man that was pointing the gun at Xavier, the one that said, get your hands off my son. He's got a gun pointing at Annie, and Annie is frightened. But then there's women behind him with towels and supplies, and we learn that they're actually there to help Annie. So they kind of did a little okey doke on us. And then we see Xavier coming in last, and Xavier goes up to Annie. And it's just a beautiful moment where we see Annie clench to Xavier and tightly embrace him. And again, it's just, she doesn't trust a lot of people. She doesn't trust anyone. Xavier is the only person she trusts in this world. That tight clench was just like a sigh of relief that, the one person she trusts in this world was someone that came through for her. So I don't know, that really touched me, just seeing that really tight embrace between Annie and Xavier in that moment. So meanwhile, surgery is actually being performed on the mom. She had to get a C-section. This is the mom that's having the baby inside of the bunker. It's going to be the first baby born in a bunker. She's having surgery performed. And then this scene is being intercut with Annie's labor being assisted. So very high anxiety moments happening here because these pregnancies are right now at high risk. C-sections are risky. And then Annie right now has this condition that is very harmful to both, like she said, to both her and the baby. So we don't know the fate of either these women or their babies in this moment, and the scenes are intercutting between each other as we're awaiting the birth of their babies. Both women start pushing, and they both inevitably deliver their babies, and the babies are born, and they're born healthy. So that was certainly a sigh of relief. And again, I just love the intercutting between these two scenes to tell this story. In the baby bunker scene, the camera cuts over to Sinatra, and we can actually see her crying, which is understandable. She lost a child, so to see this baby being born was obviously very near and dear to her. So going back to Xavier and Annie, Annie delivers her baby. The baby is beautiful. She has a chance to, I believe it's a girl. She's able to caress her and hold her and just have a moment with her daughter. But then all of a sudden, there's something that's happening to Annie. She just starts having a lot of pain. We find out that the placenta is not coming out and that Annie is bleeding, and the bleeding will not stop. And Annie has known about this the whole time, to the point where she wrote a letter and had this already prepared in the event of her death. Annie starts telling Xavier, please, it is your holy charge to do this for me. This scene was so emotional, and I cried. The moment I cried was when Annie told Xavier to tell her baby to make sure to not be afraid of people. That gutted me, because that has been Annie her whole life. She has been afraid of people. She has not been trustworthy of people. So it is his holy charge, and that is the namesake of this episode, that Annie wanted to make sure that her baby doesn't become the person that Annie used to be, or that Annie was in her lifetime rather. So I really cried at that moment. And then, just seeing Sterling K. Brown as Xavier and the tears rolling down his face. It was such an emotional scene, and it was performed so well. I just thought it was incredible. And I've actually seen this scene like a couple of times, like as I prepared for this recap, and I cried the second time that I saw it. So, just a good job to these actors. You know, it's so well done. The music is, again, Chef's Finger Kiss, playing the Elvis Presley song Can't Help Falling in Love, which is actually sang by Ingrid Michaelson. The music just swells as Annie slowly dies in Xavier's arms. It was just beautiful. It was poetic and just very well done. And, you know, we want to just say farewell to Shailene Woodley. She did such a great job in this episode and in this series of Paradise. I mean, it was very short, her time, but I loved the character Annie on Paradise. I love this character so much, and she did just such a great job playing this fully fleshed out, fully developed, very complicated, complex character that, you know, even though she had these emotional flaws and was very guarded and had these walls, she also was someone who knew how to trust the right people. So yeah, I just thought, again, very compelling, and I'm sad to see Shailene go because I really enjoyed seeing her on the show. So let's go on because the show must go on. Xavier takes Annie's baby now. He's in charge. He's in charge of her health, her security, her welfare. So he is now the new dad, essentially, of this child. And then in the next scene, Xavier goes off with his horse to find his wife, Terry. Meanwhile, the mother that gave birth to the baby in the bunker, the baby was born healthy. His name is Calvin. He actually is visited, both the mother and the baby are visited by Sinatra. Sinatra comes with a gift and just wanted to see how she's doing. And mom is like, oh, we're doing fine. Everybody's been treating us fine. But boy, am I just exhausted. She's like, you know, do you mind like helping to burp the baby and change the baby? And Sinatra's like, oh, yeah, sure. So Sinatra has some alone time with the baby, and she shares a secret. She's like, you know, she says one day as she looks up at the sky, that sky you see, that's going to be a real sky, and you're going to feel a real sun. And the constellations and the stars, they're going to be real. So we kind of get a little bit of hint about where Sinatra's motivations are and what her strategy is with this bunker and what the future is and what she sees for the bunker, that she's trying to get back to the real world again. Xavier then reads Annie's last letter to her daughter. We hear Shailene Woodley's voice, Annie's voice, in a voiceover. And it's just, again, just a somber moment in this episode. Link is actually seen in front of the bunker in the following scene, and he's got these cards that have been written on with dialogue and information that he presents in front of a security camera. And some of the cards say, take me to your leader, and I'm going to ask you nicely, but not for long. And then a man approaches Xavier and says, oh, you must be Xavier. Now, this is Xavier out on his own. He's been traveling. He's got the baby. He's also got a gun. So he's armed. So the man approaches Xavier, and Xavier takes out his gun and points it to him. And the man's like, whoa, I know Terry. I know your wife. And then he explains that he's known Terry for 3 years and that they have become very close. And so much so that she's like a sister to him. And that is the end of the episode. So we don't know who this mystery guy is, but apparently he's really close friends with Terry. He doesn't say where Terry is. We don't know the whereabouts or, what's going on with that yet. What we do know is that Link is at the bunker. He is ready to confront, and he's not taking no for an answer. And that now Xavier's in charge of Annie's baby. And this is going to be a bit of a challenge, traversing through this outside world, which is very dangerous compared to the world inside of the bunker, with a child. So how Xavier is going to be able to handle that, I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see how he's going to navigate this new challenge in his life. But he's obviously got a mission to get this baby to Link, who he doesn't even know that he knows Link from a past life. So very interesting the way things are slowly connecting together in this series. And this was just an incredible episode. So thanks for watching this video. I know, again, it was long. I try to give as much details as possible. I don't even think I gave you all of the details of the episode, but I try to give you as much details as possible. And I will try my best. I promise I'll try my best to be timely with episode 5. Till then, I'll see you next time. Bye.
Better shake your booties for black girl nerves. Better shake your booties for black girl nerves.